I want you to, there's two main places that I want you to look on this website, okay? The first is, let's go to view an ideal BASIX home. Can you click on that for me?
I don't know what I did. I tried to buy your laptop.
Okay. Now, when you get there, what you'll find is this page. And this picture is really helpful, actually. It gives you a really good sense of, oh, in a normal house, what kinds of things am I looking for? With this on the side, what I would advise is you have a look at this checklist, click it now, and if you're like me, then the first thing that you'll experience is you just get sort of overwhelmed by, my goodness, number one, this is a, sorry, I went to the picture instead. This is a big thing, there's a lot in this. And number two, there's a lot of specialized language that maybe you've never heard of before, never had to interact with. Even I've never had to interact with. So you're going to have to do a bit of hunting. Okay? So let's just have a quick scroll down. I'll tell you what I mean. Scroll, 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 scroll. Okay, so here's an example of what we're talking about. Right? You can see here, these are the kinds of things that contribute to your BASIX certification or not certification. Do you have rainwater tanks and stormwater tanks? Do you have a reticulated alternative water supply? What is a reticulated alternative water supply? A lot of these phrases, this by the way is about reuse of water, right? So can you use water that you've collected for things like watering your garden and that kind of thing? By the way, this phrase here, if you don't know what it just means drinkable. Oh. Like, is it safe for drinking? Sydney water is incredibly high quality as compared to a lot of places in the world. So not all water is drinkable though. Right? You can see there's wastewater use and that kind of thing. Some places are big enough that they have a private dam, and obviously that affects your water use significantly. For instance, at my previous school, they had a pretty big dam, and so most of the watering the gardens came from that rather than from, you know, the pumps that are drinkable water. You don't want to waste that on putting that on a farm. Okay. As you keep going, you then get to things like this. Far and away, the biggest use of electricity is going to be on controlling heat, right? Because we like our air temperatures to be comfortable, so that's why they call this thermal comfort. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to go through this page by page. So what page are we up to here? 3 of 8. It's not a huge long document, but I want you to have underneath there what that syllabus dot was pointing about, right? How I want you to identify those issues. We've just mentioned a few of them, but underneath here I want you to say what has to be paid attention to. Even something like, look at this. This is not just about air conditioning and what have you, right? We mentioned before things like windows. Have a look at what matters. Insulation, right? A few years ago, you guys are too young to remember, but there was a big grant from the government to put insulation padding into like your ceilings and that kind of thing, because they were trying to address issues of sustainability. If you've got an insulated house, you obviously don't need to use as much air conditioning or heating.
In Canberra, the thing with the company Mr. Fluffy, they tried to put all that in there, but they didn't realize until about 3 years ago that what is it? How do you pronounce it? Thank you. Is really poisonous. You know, causes like cancer and things. So they're knocking down hundreds of houses in Canberra.
Well, there were heaps of problems when this big government grant came in. It was billions of dollars. So everyone is suddenly, number one, looking for places to install, and number two, realizing, oh wait, I could probably do this. Like I can buy the stuff from a wholesaler and then install it in a house. It's not that bad. It's not that difficult. But a lot of places were cutting corners, and a lot of the actual materials they used were highly inflammable, which is obviously lots of safety problems. Because, you know, everyone wanted to do it, there was not enough regulation to make sure everyone who was doing it was doing it safely, using asbestos, those kinds of things. Anyhow, my point is just to help you identify these are the kinds of issues we're talking about. What is this about? This one here? What's this say? This is about, like, just look, we hardly ever think about this, right? Depending on what this is made of, your structure is going to lose a lot of heat or it's going to retain a lot of heat, right? Think about in your house what the windows are like, how many windows you have and how big they are, right? So that goes under here. On the website, there's one more thing I wanted to point out to you. Let me just see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. Okay, the last thing that's important for you, under this idea of how, I want you to have listed out those issues, such as thermal comfort, which means the structure and how it loses heat or retains heat. But then an important bit is when you go to the website and you say, using the BASIX assessment tool, how does it work, right? How does it work? Click on that if you haven't already, okay? I want you to read this really carefully. There's so much maths that goes into this, which you don't have to know yourself, but you need to know that there's maths going on underneath. Because otherwise it just spits out a number and you're like, where does this number come from? And it comes from places like this. Have a look at this middle sentence. This is really important. Resource demand, how many people are there, what kinds of technology are in there and how much there is, what climate your environment is. Do you live in a valley sort of area, or is yours quite flat? Or are you high or are you low? That makes a really big difference to the climate that you're going to experience. Okay? And then down the bottom here, it talks about how does it calculate based on, do you have a single dwelling? Is it something that's attached to another house? All those kinds of things are affected. Okay? So what I'm going to give you is about maybe 15 to 20 minutes to sort of poke your way around this website. There's lots of useful information there. Lots of phrases that you've maybe never heard of, which I want you to look up. And underneath this heading here, I'd like you to identify those issues. I'm going to give you some questions after that. Okay?